Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, however you're watching, wherever you're watching, however you listen, wherever you listen. It's the Bet Online Salute to Troy podcast, and we have a unique tripod today. We have our guy, Trevor McCue from the Maize And Blue McCue Review. We talked about that before.
Told you.
It rhymes. We're going to be talking a little bit USC Michigan. Before we get into that, I want to let you guys know, go to betonline.ag, put in promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV. Get a 50-cent match bonus. If you're in a fantasy and making a little cash off of fantasy, go to Underdog Fantasy app or UnderdogFantasy.com. Put in code USCLAFB and get a $100 match. Trevor, welcome to the madness. You already experienced the madness behind the scene. Welcome to the madness. We have a big game coming up here. SC, Michigan, in the big house. I don't know if this has ever happened before outside of the Rose Bowl. Now it's a conference game. This is one of the biggest things that's happened in a long time. Let me ask you this question. And it's good to ask somebody from Michigan this question, and we could get a honest question. Let's take all the pageantry out of it. Let's take the fact that it's two blue bloods. Let's take the fact that it's at the big house. Let's just look at these two teams. Do you feel this game is bigger for Michigan than it is for SC? Or do you feel like this game is big for SC as it is for Michigan? And the reason why I asked that question is I think this is a prove-it game for USC, and I think this is a must-win for Michigan. How do you feel about that?
I agree with that. I think I would even go farther. I think it's much bigger for Michigan, not just the trajectory of this season, but possibly this entire Sharon Moore era. I'd argue what USC has in their back pocket is that LSU win where Michigan has a blowout loss to Texas. So I think if USC comes into Ann Arbor, and I mean, honestly, if they lose, it's going to be close. I mean, there just doesn't look like there's going to be a scenario where Michigan could win this game big. So if USC has a close loss in Ann Arbor and has that win over LSU, I think they're fine. Look, it's a conference loss, which is, a bummer in terms of potentially getting into the Big Ten championship. But with this expanded playoff, you're almost better off losing to a really good team than you are beating a terrible one in terms of the way the committee's going to look at it. So I think USC's in a good spot with LSU already in their pocket. Michigan lost the Texas game big, and that's really impacted not just the way the country looks at them, but the way the fan base feels right now about this program today and in the future. USC is a game that at the start of the year, Michigan fans were counting as a W, right? The three games they were underdogs in were Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas. So the sentiment was kind of like, okay, go 9-3, win the games you're supposed to. Maybe you pick off one of those. Like that was kind of the expectation set. You lose this game, we're talking about 7-5 for Michigan, maybe 6-6 with a loss to Michigan State. Something this fan base is not going to accept.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
No. So I mean, I think this is a massive game for Michigan to get back on track and Sharon Moore to prove the continuity hire. We can get into this, but prove that Michigan is still Michigan, which was the entire reason he and basically everybody on the staff was hired, was this continuity angle.
Yeah. Trevor, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time joining us. Great to meet you. So you kind of mentioned it there twice in your answer a little bit with where this program is. And so I was curious, and you mentioned expectations. And so backtracking a little bit, and then we'll obviously get more to X's and O's and what the game can look like. And obviously the big quarterback news and whatnot we'll talk to you about. But with all that Michigan lost this offseason, obviously Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, Ben Herbert, strength and conditioning coach, not to mention all the players, JJ McCarthy, all the way down, Junior Colson on the defensive slide, tons of losses. Yet you're the national champions, so there's always going to be that expectations to still be great. How has this coaching staff and Sharon Moore kind of dealt with those expectations? And how, if you're around the team, do you feel this team has kind of met those expectations in terms of what they're able to fill up to those trajectory?
Yeah, I think all off season in the summer, the fall, and even leading up to the season, I think they handled the expectations well. I think Moore has done a really good job of explaining what part of the Michigan culture and what things are going to look like, what's going to stay the same, and what's going to change, where he's going to put his fingerprints, because this is his program. He doesn't need to be Jim Harbaugh 2.0 or a different version. He's earned this job. He gets to run it his way. And we've seen some changes behind the scenes in terms of recruiting and what he's done to the staff that he has there and some of the effect there. So that really raised a lot of optimism for folks. You mentioned all the departures, and I think that really bought a leash for more in this coaching staff to, like I said, maybe go 9-3 and back into the playoff, or even an 8-4. It was all going to depend on how they played, right? If you lost these games, how did you lose? If you simply lost to a better team and that's all it was, but you weren't making the mistakes, you weren't shooting yourself in the foot, you just lost to a better team. All right, I think we could understand that. And look, Texas was a better team. They looked like the best team in the nation. They're number one in the country now. But Michigan won all these games the last 3 years by almost like middle school logic, just being good at the fundamentals. Sound tackling, great communication, no penalties, don't turn the ball over, run the ball well, all this basic stuff. And they're not doing any of that right now. And I think that's where the frustration is really coming in this fan base, and that leash is already starting to get a little bit tighter in terms of, hey, this is what we expected. Because again, more was kept to continue a culture and a style of football that Jim Harbaugh had established in those last 3 years. And that wasn't just winning, it was how they won. And right now, you've got defensive players that look lost on the field. The offensive line isn't getting any push. They're getting bullied late in games. I mean, overnight, it just does not look like the same Michigan team.
Well, I'm gonna go two real quick, Ryan. Yeah. The first one I'm gonna do is I'm gonna protect Sharon Moore, and I'm gonna protect him in the fact that you said 3 years ago we were bullying teams with Jim Harbaugh. Mm-hmm. But what did it look like 4 years ago?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like this is his first year with pretty much a whole brand new roster. They lost 17 guys to the NFL draft.
Yep.
Some of these dudes really haven't played a lot of football. This is their first time doing it. If you're going to give Jim 6 years, you better give Sharon 6 years. You know what I mean? Like, just let him develop it and let him
fan base that.
That's well, repost this and I'll tell you know what I mean. And then we're like, what's some USC guy talking about? No, but I'm just being honest. You know what I mean? The past 3 years, Michigan looks good because he developed that and went it. The best school who understands coaching is in the Big Ten. The most patient school in college football is in the Big Ten, and that's Penn State. No, honestly, Penn State understands the ebbs and flows.
I was going to say Iowa, but yeah, Penn State up there.
But like Penn State understands, all right, Franklin had this class for 4 years. He has 18 seniors retiring. We may go 7-5 next year, but the next year we'll start winning 10 games again. Like that's the way college football is. That's the way it happens. It's going to be a little bit different now because of NIL and money and the college football playoff, but just give them the time. Let's give them the time, and then we'll move forward from let's talk year 5. If there's no improvement, then maybe it's time to make a change. But they wanted to expect the same thing that they got from Jim, but this was a class that was built up. This wasn't Alabama. This was guys playing together for 3 years in the same system under the same coach with the same culture with the same goal. Let Sharon Moore do that, build a guy for 4 years with all that, and move forward. That's all I'm saying. I'm just protecting.
So everything I just described to you, at no point did I say it was rational.
Yeah.
Right? Like that sentiment isn't rational. Jim Harbaugh, the same people who now love Jim Harbaugh and hate Ward Manuel, the athletic director, and think it's his fault that Jim is gone, and have turned on Sharon Moore already, wanted Jim fired in 2020. And they're lying to you if they say they didn't. Right? To your point, it wasn't just Jim Harbaugh all of a sudden flipped a switch and turned this program in 21 around. He made the decision to get rid of some of his old buddies and bring in young, innovative minds. He fired the offensive line coach, Ed Warner, who was an established O-line coach, had been really good, and decided to bring in this tight end coach from Central Michigan, and everybody lost their mind. Like, what a terrible hire that was. That was Sharon Moore. And when he moved to the O-line, the first year they won the Joe Moore Award in the Big Ten. The second year they won the Joe Moore Award again in the Big Ten, right? So a lot of that success in 21, 22, 23 came from Sharon Moore. He was the offensive coordinator. Last year, he was the head coach in 4 games. I've told Michigan fans over and over, the reason Jim loved Moore so much and talked about it publicly was one of the decisions Harbaugh made in 21, and a big reason he's with the Chargers now, is he wanted to find a better balance of football and family life, right? His wife's family is from that area of California. In the spring and summer, he was spending a bunch of time in California. Sherrone Moore was the head coach when Jim Harbaugh wasn't around. The biggest recruiting weekend they had in the spring of last year, it's Moore in the middle with the top 4 recruits. Harbaugh wasn't there, right? So Moore had earned this job. And to your point, Ro, I think he's earned time. But Michigan fans, after Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke to finally get back to this place, don't want to go back again, right? And we were talking about before we came on, I think there's an age thing, right? I'm almost 40. I got Charles Woodson behind me. When that happened, I didn't know that wasn't an every year thing, right? I thought you always won natties. Your guys always won Heismans, right? I didn't know how spoiled I was. So waiting as long as we did for it to come back around, I appreciate it. I'm probably good. There's a lot of people that grew up where Nick Saban had Alabama good every single year, right? If Bama didn't win the championship, the team that did probably beat Bama to get there. So now it's like, hey, you can't just win one. You have to be a dynasty. And that's just the expectation of fans at this point. And it's not fair, but it's where it's at. And I think, fair or not, this continuity umbrella that was put over everything with Moore has now meant not just culture, results. Like, you can't drop off at all because we only hired you to keep the Jim Harbaugh train going. And it's a tough situation to be in for sure.
Yeah, well, everybody has to remember Nick Saban had NIL before all the rest of the college had NIL. Right. So that's why he had a dynasty, but that's neither here nor there.
I'm started on that.
I'm gonna switch over
real quick, Coach. And I'll toss back to you, ask your question just to comment on that, because Trevor, is so funny. I feel like the parallels between these programs, there's a lot of similarities. We talked, before the LSU game, the parallels were insane between those two programs, but in terms of more a longer scope between USC and Michigan, there's some similarities too, because of, Lincoln Riley, his expectations, the leash that he's kind of, all of a sudden after 2 years, everyone was like, oh, we want this guy gone. And he had to fire his best friend in Alex Grinch, hire this new young buck in D'Anton Lynn as a D coordinator. And now obviously it's been only 2 games, but we're seeing the benefits of that. So a lot of parallels between what you just said and kind of what SC is going through right now. It's just a little bit expedited, but go ahead, Coach.
No, you could comment on it, Trevor.
I was going to say, I think that's where people think this will end up, right? So on the offensive side of the ball, we basically just saw everybody get promoted. So Kirk Campbell, the quarterback coach, became the OC. Grant Newsome, former offensive lineman at Michigan tight end coach, became the O-line coach. And on defense, you brought back a lot of elite talent, but you have a whole new staff. And it was the same thing, continuity. A lot of these guys brought in trying to keep the Ravens thing going. And I'm sure we'll get into Wink, but already people are wondering if, hey, maybe, would Kirk Campbell have been an offensive coordinator for any other top level Power 4 program? Or was he only the OC at Michigan because he was here as a relationship with Moore? And is Moore eventually going to have to make a decision like, hey, I need some outside eyes at OC? I think people are already kind of making that parallel is similar to Riley on defense.
Yeah. So I want to get into that. I'm sorry. I want to get into that. So, and a lot of people do this, and a lot of people say, well, he's a first-time offensive coordinator. How do you become a 10-year offensive coordinator without not being out of a first-time offensive coordinator? That's so weird to me. Like, my only thing is, if he deserved to be promoted and they sat down and talked and he did enough for him to convince him, then yeah, you know what I mean? He deserves to be the coordinator. The only thing is, and I learned this a long time ago when I was at a clinic with Dave Weinstead, and Sean McVay's suffering with this right now. Your friends get you fired.
Yes.
So hiring your friends get you fired. And the Rams defensive coordinator right now and the head coach are friends. That would get you fired. So, and Jim learned the hard way. So I think
100%.
there's gonna have to be a massive turn there for it to get back to where it is. But it's growing pains. You know what I mean? These growing pains are different than Colorado's growing pains. You have Sherrone Moore, who's been through the grind and understands coaching and learned a lot from Jim, even probably John too. John probably came by, got some nuggets from John, from all these people that are really great, compared to Deion, who just jumped in like, I'm Deion Sanders, I know what I'm doing. Apparently you don't. Jerome knows what he's doing. He just needs to learn. Unfortunately, he has to learn from a defending national championship team and fans who are expecting another national championship.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but just...
No, you're good. No, because I mean, there's two roads right now, and they're either going to come together at some point or they're going to split, and it's going to be tension, right? And I think there's a massive difference between the fan sentiment and what's going on with the team. Because when you talk to these players, look, I don't know how many times I have to tell fans, I promise you're not more upset than the players are. Like, I don't know why you don't understand that, but like, they don't like losing, right? Yeah. Like, trust me, you don't need to tell them, right? So, and that wasn't something they've experienced in a while, right? Texas was the first regular season loss since Michigan State, 2021. First loss altogether since TCU in 2022.
Wow.
First loss in Michigan Stadium, not including the COVID year, since 2019, right? This was new territory for them. And look, most teams lose a game occasionally. That's not a bad, like, I mean, it's a bad thing, but it's not a massive deal. And again, when you think about the turnover and everything, the one thing I think the staff and where the concerns coming in is this staff set a lot of expectations in this offseason that they were really happy with this team and that they could contend for the Big Ten and that they didn't think there was going to be drop off at positions like the offensive line and that the depth would be there and that the guys they talked about along the defensive line to provide depth. And, you know, I could get into all these little things of expectations they set that aren't there now. Right. And look, a lot of it's coach speak, but with some of the decisions in terms of personnel too. And, you know, we'll talk about the quarterback. We're seeing some changes now. People are wondering, hey, did this coaching staff maybe mess up on the most important thing, which is assessing their own talent? Right. So that, I think that's where some of the anxiety comes in too, is it looks like there's been some wrong decisions. And, you know, back to Kirk too, just, I hate bringing up play calling because I think it's such a funny joke where it's like when a play goes well, everybody's like, oh, I love the play calling on that drive. And then when it's not successful, oh, what are we doing with the play calling? Right. You know what I mean? It's like, are you actually upset with the play call and the result? Right. Like, but there has been some interesting formations and some weird flow that's a little bit different than what Michigan did. And that's where I think some of that sentiment comes from too. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go, but these players believe in more. There's a reason he's a head coach. They believe in the staff. They believe in each other. There's enough still there in terms of leadership from the previous team that the culture's still kind of chugging along. And this is a team that's always gotten better as the year goes on. They've never been great at the start of the year. What they haven't had to do is play Texas and USC at the start of the year for the last 3 years. So
yeah, that helps. All right. Let me ask you this, Trevor, and Coach, I'll let you ask about defense and Wink Martindale. So
I haven't even asked my original question yet, so I'm a little behind. I got thrown off on the thing, but go ahead.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go to offense?
Well, I was going to ask about the game first, so let me ask about the game.
Yeah.
So this game at the beginning, let's talk should and could, right? So August, we talked Michigan, USC. Michigan should win. USC can win, could win if they do this, this, and this. I think the should and could flipped.
Absolutely.
And so it turns into Michigan can win, and they could win if they do this, this, and this. USC should win. I'll linger to this. This is the first time these kids will be in front of 150,000. The first time. This will be the first time these kids will have to deal. I'm talking USC. This is the first time they'll have to deal with something of this pageantry, right? When I played there, Rose Bowl was normal. Coliseum was 98,000 people. Playing for something, it was a common thing. It was an automatic. This is going to be the first time that they have to deal with this pageantry. This is the first time that they're going to get a big stadium like this. This is the first time that this game means something this early in the season. This is a lot of firsts for USC that people are overlooking.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the place that they are in right now, they should win, right? And Michigan can win if they execute this, this, and this. Do you agree that this should and could flip?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this was a game that Michigan fans, and I think not even just fans, but people like us or whatever around football, were counting as a win for Michigan. And it wasn't necessarily a knock at USC. It was a lot of the same things Michigan's dealing with, right? Change at quarterback, losing Caleb Williams is a big deal, right? Having the new starter. Yes, new defensive scheme, but how long is it going to take? Does he have to get his dudes? We at Michigan, because we know that scheme, we're like, no, it's not going to take long, because part of what makes that scheme so great is it just adapts to the strengths of the players you have already. But, Miller Moss comes out and throws a hell of a game against LSU, and all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, and Michigan's the exact opposite, right? So, yeah, it has absolutely flipped where I think USC should win this game. Michigan absolutely could. The defensive element of it is an interesting angle because USC is basically in the infant stages of a defense Michigan has used and gone against in practice every single day for the last 3.5 years. Right. So that's an interesting angle that could benefit Michigan. And yeah, coming to the big house, look, this is great for college football. I said the same thing when Texas was in the stadium. This is great for college football. I can't wait for Michigan to be in the Coliseum as well. I mean, just two legendary programs. I looked it up while we were talking. 1958, last time USC was in Ann Arbor. So,
wow. Does that even count? Does that count?
Right. I have a rule on that, and no. But I think the state and Michigan, a lot of the talk going into Texas was, look, we're used to big games, right? Like, we've been to the playoff 3 years. We played in that Rose Bowl against Alabama. We've been to the Natty. So, like, for them, this isn't a big game. That's kind of the attitude that they're carrying. I do wonder, though, if this chip is more beneficial. The fact people think they're going to lose, I wonder if that's something this team needed. And I brought up the losses to Michigan State in 21. I don't think they beat I don't think they beat Penn State, and I don't think they beat Ohio State in 21 if they don't lose that Michigan State game. We might say, I don't think Michigan beats USC if they didn't lose that Texas game. That could be the scenario we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree with that because that was when they lost that game. Like, all right, this is going to set something up. Now, that being said, and you know better than me, but didn't look great against Arkansas State. But it's a whole new week and a whole new ball game, and I'm really curious, Trevor, to see, knowing that these defensive schemes are so similar. And for those that don't know, obviously you know, but D'Anton Lynn actually coached under Wink Martindale at Baltimore. He was a safeties coach while Wink was the DC. I'm curious who that will benefit more. If that'll benefit Michigan more, or if it'll benefit USC more, because they run such a different offense than what Michigan is used to seeing. And I think USC's scout team can probably replicate maybe their offense because D'Anton Lynn might know a little bit of intricacies based on stuff they've seen. However, and this gets me to my actual question, with the big change of the starting quarterback in Alex Orji from Davis Warren, kind of a two-part question for you. One, just your thoughts on Orji, what he brings. I know everyone's talked about only 7 pass attempts, 2 of those for touchdowns, whatever. The kid can play, obviously, or they wouldn't have made him the job or given him the job. So just your thoughts overall on Orji, what he brings to this offense. And then a little bit more overarching, did it surprise you, knowing he was on the roster, that Michigan didn't pursue a transfer portal quarterback more in the offseason?
Yeah, so trying to think.
Sorry, that was a long-winded question.
Yeah, no, and I can get long-winded and I can go off track, so I want to make sure I attack this correctly. I'm going to start with the transfer portal and then probably have you repeat the first one.
Yeah.
Michigan was put in such a terrible situation because their season ended a week before the NFL deadline.
Yeah.
And there was no way J.J. McCarthy was declaring publicly what he was going to do. And I don't care. This fan base now, of course, loves looking back and saying, oh, they should have done this and that. This fan base still hates Cade McNamara for announcing he was transferring to Iowa around the Big Ten championship game, even though he was injured and never going to play for Michigan again.
Yeah.
If J.J. McCarthy, a month before the Rose Bowl, announced he was going to the pros, this fan base would have lost their mind. Like, what are you focused on? Blah, 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 right? But the truth is, that's what would have needed to happen for Michigan to be active in that winter portal window. Because these guys are making decisions end of November, early December. And no quarterback was going to commit here in Ann Arbor without that public declaration that he was leaving. And then in the spring window, there really wasn't anybody. Now, did Michigan I don't want to say tamper, but maybe make it known to a couple guys like, hey, if you entered, we might be interested. I believe they did. And those guys didn't enter. So it's so easy now to look back on that, but there just really wasn't a scenario where it would have lined up. Obviously, if JJ comes back, this is a completely different team, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, to your point with Alex Orji, one of the reasons we know they believe in him as a quarterback is because he's still a quarterback. From the day he committed, everyone's like, well, he's probably going to end up at linebacker. He's built like one. His brother was, I believe, all SEC at Vanderbilt. And he's going to go to another position. Maybe he's a tight end, halfback, right? And they never moved him, and they continue to keep him in that QB room. They continue to develop him. They clearly believed in him. And then against Ohio State in 2023, not in garbage time, but in crucial moments, they take J.J. McCarthy off the field and let Alex Orji come out. Now, they didn't let him throw it. He ran it. But you still have enough trust in that big game to take who Jim Harbaugh called the best quarterback in Michigan football history off the field and put Orji on. And they did that in the Big Ten championship game against Iowa. They did that in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. One of the plays was actually a call for him to throw it, but the Mullings was covered. He didn't throw it. And they did it in the national championship. So that was kind of the talk this offseason was like, look, we know we can trust him in big moments. We understand like his completion rate in high school was less than 50%. We know the concerns with passing. If we can get him to hit the easy short throws, the deep shot when it's available and not turn the ball over, we think what he brings to this offense as a runner and that extra level as an athlete, and frankly, just as a vibe, right? He's a baller and like guys gravitate to him and his attitude and his aura. And that's why everyone expected him to be the starter. And these last few practices of fall camp happen and Michigan decides they want to go with Warren out the gate. That feels like the safer option. And basically he was starting because of the risk of turnover. So you start turning the ball over. Well, then why in the world aren't we letting Alex Orji out there? And that's where we are now. And of course, fans are doing the hindsight thing, or just started from the beginning, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. You're playing USC, you're 2-1, and Alex Orji's your starting quarterback. How you got here, we talk about later, but those are the facts.
Yeah. You guys were talking about how Wink and Coach Lynn coach together, and their defense is pretty similar. I would disagree. I think Lynn plays a little bit more zone. And he plays a little bit more. He runs a little bit more fire zone than Wink. Wink runs a lot of man.
Lynn's a lot closer to what Minter and McDonald were doing, which is why a lot of people thought, look, Minter was leaving no matter what.
Yeah,
he was going to the NFL no more what. Well, no, even if Harbaugh stays.
Right.
Minter's the most coveted NFL DC. He's leaving no matter what. The name everybody had out there that they wanted was Lynn. So when he left UCLA, we were like, oh no. And then there was 3 other Ravens guys that were on Michigan's checklist. Every single one of them got a DC job in the NFL this offseason. And that was kind of how they trickled down to Wink. So no, I agree with you. I think Lynn is the more zone advanced concept than compared to Wink.
Yeah. But they both do a good job of being +1 in the box. They do a really good job of being +1 in the box. And Wink does a good job in disguising. This is where, from what I've watched, this is where I see that Michigan struggles on defense, and everybody is saying they're struggling on defense. This is where it's a little bit too complex. It's a check for a check for a check. And the best example I could give SC fans is when Monty Kiffin came in and was the DC. And everybody's like, what's wrong with the defense? And RP Monty, legend. But everybody was like, what's wrong with the defense?
Forgot all about that.
And it finally came down like, the defense is a little complex. Lane talked to his dad, they dumbed it down, and it got a lot better, right? So I think Wink's defense is NFL based, and I get you. These are Division I athletes, but I had the same issue. When I was coaching in college, I couldn't teach the same stuff in high school, even though it's one level down and where it is. Everybody on Michigan's roster is not going to the NFL. So be it. They're going to be Michigan men and have jobs, right? It's a little complex, and I think that's where the issue is. When you see motions and they start checking stuff and moving around, once a team starts moving around, that's where they get lost. From what I see, I could be wrong, but that's just how I see it. I think Winks is a little bit too complex, and he needs to dumb it down for him to play fast. And I say this all the time, Ryan, put the players in the best position possible to make plays and be successful.
My heart, Coach.
I said it all the time last year. I say that all the time.
You just nailed it. Okay, so what we saw against Texas, I'm gonna get angry even just talking about it. Was the opposite of what you just said, right? What Minter did, look, with Minter, and I'm sure Lynn is the same way. Yes, you can disguise pressure. Yes, you can disguise coverage, but you can create advantages and confuse the offense with stunts, twists on the defensive front, whatever. What Wink was doing against Texas, he loves doing his 7-man line, right? So you have your 4 linemen, 2 linebackers, and a safety. You don't know who's coming or going. That part I'm fine with. The issue was he was taking Mason Graham, arguably the best defensive tackle in the country, 3 technique, and putting him as a standing edge 14 times against Texas, 5 times on 3rd down, standing him outside on the edge. Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart, you 2 edge defenders, were both on the same side of the defense. And you hide and disguise your coverage. And then what ends up happening is Graham's coming as an edge. He doesn't have the footwork and balance to get to the quarterback. And the other guy coming is Quinten Johnson, who's your cover safety. So in the process of trying to trick the offense, all you've done is taken your best players out of the position where they succeed, right? And what we saw against Arkansas State and what we're hoping continues against USC was this back to basics approach, right? Leave Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the interior, Derek Moore and Stewart. You can send Barham, the linebacker. You can send Barry as a nickel. You can do a cornerback blitz. Drop Moore and Stewart into coverage occasionally if you want. Do these different looks, but don't get so exotic that you're now weakening yourself because you're trying to trick. You're not going to trick Sark, and you're not going to trick Lincoln Riley. These are offensive geniuses, right? Mm-hmm. Line up your dudes in the best position to succeed, like you said. Win your 1-on-1s, win your 11-on-11s. If you're the better team, you're going to win the game.
Do you think Coach Lynn's disguises will give Orji some issues? I'm a little worried about Orji because he's a runner, and we haven't seen a runner yet this year, and that was our biggest kryptonite last year. But we do tackle better now. But do you think the disguises that Coach Lynn gives off, do you think that will give Orji some issues?
Yeah, I do. Now, again, the advantage could be he's gone against not just Wink's version of this defense, but 2 years prior, Minter and McDonald. And the reason Orji really rose as a quarterback and amongst coaches, their belief in him was he was the most common scout team quarterback, especially Alabama, Jalen Milroe. We heard that all the time, and that was kind of where that hype and comparison came from. He's familiar with this type of scheme. I think the advantage isn't just him as a runner, but the threat of him as a runner. Look, I'm a Michigan dude. I'm not a big fan of Urban Meyer, but he said forever,
nobody is.
Having a quarterback that can run makes it 11 versus 11 instead of 11 versus 10.
Yep.
It's really that simple. You gain a number, right? So if Michigan is going to get back to its roots of running the football to establish the pass, play action, help Alex Orji out, Orji back there with Mullings, Orji back there with Edwards, hopefully Orji back there with both of them in some sets, Edwards splitting out wide, those things are going to help him, and the defense having to account for him in that way is going to help him. But look, if it's a third and obvious passing situation and Orji's dropping back, I'm nervous. He's going to lock into first reads and Lynn's going to trick him. And that's very possible. And look, Warren threw 3 picks against Arkansas State. So if Orji throws 1 or 2 in this game, are you any worse off? Probably not, right? That's kind of the mindset at this point. But yeah, in the passing game, I think Michigan really has to establish a run because without play action, I think Lynn's going to, like I said, if it's 3rd and 9 and Michigan's back there in an empty set like they've been doing in some situations, they're going to mess with Orji.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, Trevor, this is great stuff. A couple more and then we'll get you out of here. I know we've already kept you long. Really appreciate the time.
I could do this for hours, dude.
Yeah, we're the same way. Especially once we get going, we're like, oh, it's been an hour. We should probably wrap up. Yeah. You mentioned the running game, and I think Donovan Edwards, I don't know the exact number, but I think he has like 18 plays of 3 or fewer yards or something like that. And through 3 games, you would think really nothing of that. But considering 2 of those opponents are Fresno State and Arkansas State, I guess my question is, what's been your assessment of this offensive line thus far? You mentioned obviously Sherrod Moore coming from the offensive line, coaching ranks to offensive coordinator, head coach, all the awards the offensive lines have received in past. Does it seem like this is the offensive line getting the same push, or is this more of a non-threatening passing game that may be thwarting the running game a little bit? And how do you see that playing out now with Orji going against this Lynn defense?
Look, the offensive line isn't as good as it's been. And that's not a shock. You lost a lot of NFL players off that offensive line. 6 guys went to the NFL last year. Insane. That said, there's some experience. There's some guys that have been in the program for a while. They're getting better every week. And that's always been the case. Like we talked about earlier, look, Harbaugh built this program a lot like an NFL team where it was just this progress every week. You were playing your best ball at the end of the year. And Michigan was able to do that because the schedule was advantageous in years past. I've pulled up some of the pressure stats and some of the run block grades and things like that on these offensive lines over the last few years. And this group's pretty much right in line with what some of the best offensive lines have done. They just haven't played against, great opponents like they have with Texas to start the year and now USC coming in. There's 2 problem spots. Center. Again, this is where the coaching decisions have kind of been questioned. Greg Crippen was praised for 2 years. He was learning behind Olu Oluwatimi, who was the best center in the country the 1 year he was here at Michigan. He not only learned behind Drake Nugent for a year, but we were told he was pushing Nugent, arguably for the starting job, all the way through fall camp last year. He's anointed as the starter in spring and summer. And then all of a sudden, Dom Jadis, a former defensive line, Michigan's lowest ranked recruit in the 21 class, has pushed him and won the starting job. I was like, oh, okay, well, we're going to assume this is a good thing because you want it to be, right? Yeah. But they've both played in these games, and it looks like Crippen's getting more push. It looks like the 2 guards, El Hadi and I can't think of his name, Preep, look better with him in there. And it sounds like Crippen's probably going to get the start in this game. So now we're back to Crippen and Orji, kind of what we expected. Evan Link's been a little bit of an issue at right tackle. He allowed 10 pressures against Texas, but he's a redshirt freshman. And again, looked better last week. I think they think he'll come along, right? He'll get better. He's been kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit. What's changed, and back to the criticism on Kirk, is Michigan ran so much jumbo last year, bringing in 6 offensive linemen. They ran so much 12 personnel, 13 personnel, if you want to count Bredesen in that tight end conversation, 22. There was always 6, 7, 8, 9 guys lined up on the offensive line. That was actually the criticism last year from Michigan fans was, you have J.J. McCarthy. Why are you coming out with only 1 wide receiver? Let him throw. And if there was any pressure, they were bringing in this extra protection. And for Davis Warren, look, you can't do what Davis Warren did, but they were going 4 and 5 wide, empty set all the time and not getting him extra protection. And that was this big criticism. Last week, 14 snaps of jumbo with the extra tackle in, a lot more 12 personnel, a lot more 22. That helped the run game. We saw that. And I think that system would help Alex Orji as well. And I almost wonder, too, with the late switch at quarterback, if part of the funkiness with this offense has been they spent an entire offseason building offense around Alex Orji and then made Davis Warren the starter, right? So maybe it looks better because this is probably what they wanted to begin with, right? But we don't know. That's the weird thing about this is, and again, it's early in the year, this team just really has no identity. We don't know what we're going to see. And now you have a new quarterback for your first Big Ten game, and we don't know what it's going to look like.
This is my last one here for you. I always wondered this. I played against Michigan in the 2007 Rose Bowl, 2006 season. Jake Longchuck, Mike Hart, Braylan Edwards, all those guys. And SC has a long history playing Michigan in the Rose Bowl. Mm-hmm. I guess you could consider them a rivalry. But what is, I mean, I'm guessing, like, you know what I mean? Like Michigan Rose Bowl, like Michigan USC Rose Bowl, common thing, Michigan Ohio State Rose Bowl. I mean, SC owns the Rose Bowl. We have 2 home stadiums. Just depends on what time of year we want to play.
I like that.
But what is the relationship? I've never really ran across a Michigan fan in my life, which is weird. But what's the relationship towards SE as far as like Michigan? Like, what is that like? How do you guys feel about USC?
Man, there might be more Michigan fans in LA than Ann Arbor.
Really?
Oh yeah,
I've never ran into one. That's so crazy.
A lot of Michigan grads live out there.
You really never ran into one?
Never ran into a Michigan fan.
Wild.
I don't know a lot, but I know quite a few. I knew a lot.
I will say this. My godfather is from Ben Harbor, Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
He's from Ben Harbor. That's the only Michigan fan I knew. But once I signed the SC, he was like, well, I've been in California for so long. Like, I'm an SC fan now once I signed. Like, that's the only, like, Michigan fan that I've ever knew. I've never ran into one. Honestly, swear.
So, it might be an age thing, too. I don't know. I grew up with the national championship. I don't want to say it didn't matter, but, like, if a bunch of writers decided you were a national champion, then cool. But the things you could control was beating your rivals on the field, winning your conference, and going to the Rose Bowl.
Right.
Like, that was it. Michigan in the Rose Bowl, man. You know, that's why I've got that Charles Woodson picture up there. That's why that Alabama game meant so much. It was at the Rose Bowl, too. And it might be the last. I mean, I wish it would have been a Pac-12 team, right? But I think for anyone that's been around for a while, the vibes of the Michigan Pac-12 and playing in that Rose Bowl are still there. And that's how they think of USC. And they can probably think of some game from the 90s or something like that still holds memories to them. I think it's similar to what happened with Texas too, though. Like there's an odd level of respect for just understanding it's another blue blood program that, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, right? You play in one of the best stadiums in the country. Your uniform is iconic that even if you're not a college football fan, you know what USC's uniform is when you see it, right? The legendary players you can go back to Marcus Allen. You can talk about Leinart, Bush, right? Like there's a lot of these similarities, even though West Coast, Midwest, right? And they haven't played very much. So being in the same conference is probably going to take a little bit of getting used to. But like you said, man, just the pageantry. If the anxiety from the Texas loss and how Michigan has been playing wasn't there coming into this year, everyone's like, dude, we're going to have USC in the big house. How cool is that? How cool is it? Mm-hmm. And I think once game time comes, I think that sentiment will start to come back just like it did, you know, in the Texas game. Like, man, this is pretty cool. Like these two fan bases coming together. Michigan fans really only hate two, maybe three fan bases. And it's Ohio State, it's Michigan State, it's Penn State. Oh, Notre Dame. What am I thinking? Hate Notre Dame too. But,
we got that.
Yeah, same thing with us. Same thing with us. Yeah.
We got that.
And to piggyback on that, I'll let you go real quick, Ryan. I'm sorry. To piggyback, that's how we feel about Penn State coming to the Coliseum. Like it's like Penn State's actually coming to the Coliseum. Like we can't believe this. Like we have Wisconsin coming, Minnesota, Nebraska.
James Franklin's agent's been trying to get him in that stadium for years.
Yeah, well, he's not good enough. But no, like that. But it's still Penn State. Like when you think of Penn State, you think of Joe Paterno and all the great linebackers that came through in there and all that. And like when I think of Penn State, I think of that one Orange Bowl game where they missed the field goal kick. I think against Florida State. They went to like 5 overtimes or something like that. They kept missing the field goal to win the game. It was a while ago, but about 2005. It was 2005 because I was
going to say it was. 05. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. It was 2005. I was actually being recruited. We were at a pizza place talking to a school. That's how I remember it. But that's how we feel about Penn State, like coming to the Coliseum. That's why we were actually looking up when Penn State plays USC because we're talking about going to State College because you can't miss an opportunity like that. We're upset we're missing the opportunity to go see them play in the big house, and we probably won't see it again because by the time they play each other again, there won't be any conferences. But go ahead, Ryan, ask your question.
Yeah, right. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Real quick, though, one thing on that note, just the vibe, like I was saying with the old folks like us, that the 1990 Rose Bowl, that's Bo's last game.
Yeah.
And is shot at an undefeated season and maybe a national championship, and USC wins that game. So I bet there's some dudes that probably still hate USC for that. But otherwise, it's definitely Reggie Bush and Leinart in the 2000s. But
that makes sense. Absolutely. Real quick, Coach, are you drinking a Busch Light? What is that?
It's a LaCroix. It's a beach plum.
I don't care then. If it was a Busch Light, I'd be like, that's sweet.
If we're cracking beers, my bad. Let me grab one. Let's.
Yeah.
I should have cracked a Busch Light. That's like the Midwest, I should have
got a case of hams or something. Since
hams.
I had hams all at my wedding. So, well, Trevor, we'll get you out here on this. I know score predictions are not always the most fun, but just curious, all the stuff we've talked about, who you taking this game? What score you got?
Yeah, so the theory of Michigan's success for however the last 3 years, obviously this is a different year, but the number's always been 30. Michigan's got to score 30 and they got to hold their opponent under 30. When they do, they win literally every time, right? Their losses in the last 4 years, Michigan State, TCU, and then now this Texas game, they gave up 30 points. So that's going to be the key for this defense. If they can keep USC under 30, I think they can. If Wink gets to closer to what we saw last week, back to the basic schemes, run basically 4-2-5, run some nickel. You can do some variations where you do your 5-man fronts. It's all about red zone defense and third down conversions. If they do those things, I think they can keep them under 30. Can this offense score 30? I don't know. I don't know. And I do think the switch to Orji needs to be made. I am a massive Davis Warren fan. I mean, for those who don't know his story, whatever, he's an incredible kid. I think he's a better quarterback than he got credit for. I don't think the line was in a position. I don't think the run game and some other things were there to help him. But this offense needs a spark, and that spark's going to be Alex Orji. I think Michigan's probably getting to 20 or 24, and I don't think that's going to be enough. So I'm probably going to guess a 27-20, 27-24 USC win. But look, this feels at the beginning of the year, I didn't think it would be this way, but this feels a lot like Texas where, look, if everything goes right for Michigan, I think they can win close. If everything goes right for Michigan, except for maybe one or two things, USC is going to win close. And if things go right for USC and the wheels fall off for Michigan, they're going to lose big. And if Lincoln Riley doesn't take his foot off the gas like Sark did at the end of that game, it could get ugly. There's no scenario where Michigan blows out USC, in my opinion. So I'm settling in that 27-20, 27-24 for now, but that fear of blowout is in the back of my mind.
20, you got to go with 27-20 because great teams cover, good teams win. So we got to keep the cover going.
Is it 6.5 still, or what do you got?
It's 5. It's 5.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it dropped a half a point. So the wise guys know something we don't know. I'll check it again right now, though. But last time I looked, it was 5.
I mean, look, the big question that we haven't talked about, obviously, is what Loveland is going to be, right? He's the one offensive player that's consistently
5.5.
Nice. He's their best offensive player, their best receiving weapon. I think he's probably if it was up to him, he's going to go Saturday, right? We'll see. I think he'll probably play, but if he doesn't practice all week and what kind of shape is he in come Saturday, that could be a big factor as well.
Yeah, well, that's a great point because USC, whether we asked Lincoln Riley about this in his presser, if it was a benefit or not, but having a bye so early, but they will be fully healthy coming into this game, getting Mason Cobb back, Eric Gentry's full go, Jaylin Smith's a full go on defense. So yeah, differing kind of like what is a true injury. And college is always so confusing because you never really know till like right before kickoff, like, oh, that guy's not wearing pads. I guess he's out.
Well, I mean, we had guys warm up last week and then come back out in street clothes. So I mean, you never know. Yeah,
it's crazy. So anything else, Coach? We'll get out of here.
No, that's all I have. I appreciate you, Trevor, for coming on, man.
Yeah, appreciate you guys too. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much. Trevor McCue, senior editor, Maize And Blue report. Thanks. Oh, excuse me, Maize And Blue review.
There it is.
McCue, geez.
McCue Blue review.
Yeah. Actually, Trevor, Trevor, I'm gonna do this. After the game Saturday, if you're free, we do a live. If you want to hop on the live and talk a little bit on the live, you're more than welcome to come on. Yeah. Ryan might not be okay with it, but it's my show, so I'm saying.
Why would I not be?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'll just like giving you a hard time sometimes. But no, we so the game is at 12:30 our time. So
3:30, yes, yeah.
So that's like 5 o'clock for you. We'll do 4:30 here, 7:30 there.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
like half hour after the game ends, something like that.
Yep. Yeah. If you want to come on, you're more than welcome to come on. We could.
If I can make that work, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, good deal. I'll have my people call your people.
Sounds good.
All right, Trevor. I appreciate you. For all the fans, I appreciate you too. This is Bet Online, Detroit podcast. You guys know how it goes. Live free. Fight on.